All right, guys, so I'm here to talk a little bit about allele frequencies. All right, so let's start by breaking down alleles and frequencies like I do on the slide. Alleles we talked about in our, alleles we talked about in our genetics unit. Okay, we know that an allele is a version of a trait. When we talked about pea plants, we said that pea plants can have the tall version of the trait or the short version of the trait, okay? Frequency, when we talk about frequency in general, it's how often or how many times something occurs. So the frequency of it raining in the month of May, the frequency of us having a snow day this year was very small, okay? Those are things that are frequencies, how often something happens. The frequency of some of you doing your homework, okay? How often does something happen? So now we have allele frequencies. So now what we're doing is we're taking a look at how often does a specific trait or an allele show up in a population, all right? Now, when we were talking about natural selection and survival of the fittest, which you got to remember that stuff for all of this, okay? We talked about how some traits help an organism to survive. It helps an organism be able to live, get all the things that it needs, and then be able to reproduce and pass on its traits. So, if an organism has a favorable, which means good, version of the gene, which helps them survive, it would make sense that over time, you would see more of that trait occurring. It means we would have a greater frequency of the more favorable trait. Vice versa, 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 which actually doesn't exist, that whole phrase, just so you know, okay? If it's an unfavorable trait, if it's not a trait that helps you survive, technically, we should see the frequency of that trait decrease over time. For example, on the slide, I have the cutest little picture of a tiny, tiny, tiny little baby polar bear. Oh my goodness, so cute, okay? Let's say polar bears could be white or they could be brown. In their environment, which is covered with ice and snow, covered with ice and snow, like happy feet, like penguins, right? In their environment, which of those versions of the trait do you think is more favorable? The white fur version of the trait or the brown fur version of the trait? Well, the white fur version of the trait is more favorable. So how often do you think that trait occurs? Does it occur more or less than the brown fur trait? It occurs more. So when we look at polar bears, the frequency of the white fur trait occurring is very high. The frequency of the brown fur trait occurring is very low. So the favorable trait, which is having white fur if you're a polar bear, the favorable trait, the frequency increases. The unfavorable trait, because you're easier to hunt by other organisms, the unfavorable trait we see over time decreases. In fact, it could decrease so much that all polar bears are white. That is allele frequencies. Thanks, guys. See ya.